before we started rolling, we were talking about the effects of DMT. I told you I was super afraid to try it again by myself.
Yeah.
And people I've spoken with that know more about this than I do, which isn't saying much, said that there's not really any documented cases of people having any like real adverse effects of using DMT or overusing DMT.
Yeah, that's not been my experience. Every once or twice a year, I get a note from a family member or a friend of somebody who has smoked way too much DMT. And they develop a certain kind of mental state. It's kind of messianic, that they feel they have the answer. And if people don't agree with their answer, they get mad.
Really?
Yeah, so they're convinced that it's kind of messianic in nature.
Have you ever heard of anybody smoking DMT and sort of like not coming back fully? Getting like stuck in like this weird slippery version of reality like for forever? Because I have friends that in high school that took a lot of LSD or smoked a lot of weed, and after a certain point they were just never the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's hard to say. I mean, personalities get modified, I think, under the influence, or can be modified under the influence of a psychedelic. But it's more, I think, that they made those changes more real in their lives. And that might be what people are referring to as that they've changed. They maybe took more action on some of the ideas they had than otherwise would have been the case.
Yeah.
I think that's how psychedelics work, actually, is they just increase the strength and power of things which already exist in the mind. If you want to be a happier person, you might become happier after taking a psychedelic because it's convinced you that it's good to be happy.
Yeah, I recently had a gentleman on here who said he's done DMT thousands of times.
Right.
And I was blown away by that.
I wonder.
And he's explaining to me he uses it as a tool to improve his life. And he was saying like he will go into it with the intention of seeking an answer to something or to solving some specific problem in his life. And the guy's been super successful. He's created like this super successful rock band. He's a part of all these, crazy ventures. He's traveling the world. He's got a great life. And so he's a great example of, a great testimony to the fact that this could possibly work. But yeah, that aspect of it, I think, has me the most interested.
Yeah, one of my old colleagues in the 1960s, before DMT was that well known, smoked a 1/4 pound of DMT in a year. And he, there are a couple of interesting things. As a result, he became convinced that the world was made out of vibrations. And he developed visual mathematics as a result of, this prolonged exposure to the DMT state.
Wow. Visual mathematics?
Visual mathematics. Yeah, it's a thing, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's one of the founders.
What is it?
It's the visual representation of mathematical equations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
You know those Mandelbrot sets?
I don't think so.
Yeah, that's visual mathematics. Mandelbrot sets.
Mandelbrot set. Go to the images. Is this it?
Yeah.
Huh. That's bizarre.
Yeah, every point is a mathematical equation being played out in some form or another. You change the variables in the equation, but it's the same formula. And the visual patterns change.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So, you were the first person in the United States to do human research on psychedelics. You are probably like one of the most legendary people in the psychedelic world. And one of the things that really blew my mind was that you were explaining on, I think it was Hamilton's podcast. I could be wrong. I think it was Hamilton's podcast. You were explaining how you had the idea to get this funded when you were hanging out with Terrence McKenna and you guys decided that it would be the best way to get it funded through the war on drugs.
Right. Right.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it was 1988. And I was kind of at a crossroads of where my career was going. The melatonin and pineal work hadn't quite panned out the way I wanted it to. But I was still interested in the pineal gland and in psychedelics mostly. Yeah. And I met Terrence a year or two before. He's the first person to give me DMT, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, 1986 or something.
Oh, wow.
And then a couple of years later, I was driving down from Canada, stopped at their place, and we spent the day up in his loft library.
Wow.
Yeah, and we just the war on the war on drugs was in full steam ahead. There was a lot of money being poured into it.
What a clever idea.
And we came up with the idea of the ultimate study: give DMT to people and see what it does. You can't really argue with that. And I described it as a abusable drug. It's the prototypical classic psychedelic. And people were still using psychedelics, and we didn't know how they worked or really what they did in the face of like 20 years of intervening animal research. So there were pretty straightforward kinds of arguments that could have been used against studying the drug or for studying the drug. And I framed it as, let's find out more. And no value judgment placed on the work, no therapy or religious motivations.
What do you think DMT in a healthy dose does to the human brain? Not necessarily. I know it's speculative when you're talking about what it's doing to the brain when you're taking it, when it's active.
Right.
But like, kind of like when it subsides, like, what do you think the after effect is?
Well, I think it works on the imagination. So if you can, divide the mind into an intellectual part and an imaginative part, it's based on some of the ideas of Aristotle, that the imaginative part of the mind holds on to, perceptions, emotions, the feelings of certainty, and the intellectual part is ideas, abstract notions. So I think that DMT ultimately stimulates the imagination as compared to stimulating the intellect. It makes things, it appears, but what the appearance actually means is more dependent on the intellect.
Yeah. One of the things David Nichols was explaining to me was that there was a technical word he used to describe how it actually increases neural density. And there's this term, the scientific term for these neural branches, like the branches on trees,
right? That
they grow and they become more connected and more full. In the brain.
Yeah, he was probably talking about neurogenesis and neuroplasticity.
Yes, I think that's what it was.
Yeah, so stem cells converting to neurons is neurogenesis. You're making new neurons.
Right.
And neuroplasticity is increasing the number and complexity of connections among neurons.
Yeah, because every person I've ever talked to that does DMT, they're all super smart. That was part of this famous John Hopkins study on psilocybin with the religious leaders that was, for some reason, never published. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea of it was to get religious leaders from different, like Christianity, Judaism, Eastern religions, and see if their religious worldview affected their experience on psychedelics. Is that what the basic gist of it was?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I've heard about that study. I don't know the details. I thought
that was the famous one that was never published.
I think it is going to be coming out.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've got some information regarding it. Yeah, I think it's been accepted finally. I'm not sure, but it was from a reliable person.
What would you speculate would be the outcome of that?
Well, I think there's another motivation as well, which is to demonstrate that there's a common spiritual experience regardless of your specific faith. I think that's one of the motivations.
Yeah, they're motivated to prove this idea called perennialism, I think it's called.
Yeah, the mystical experience, which is kind of this unitive, ego-dissolved, no time or space kind of experience, which is part of most psychedelic experiences, but I don't think it necessarily precludes differences in religious experience as well, which might even be more important. I think overall too, it would make a cleric, possibly more dedicated, to the clergy and the religion.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing about what that's like. As Travis pointed out to me, which blew my mind, is that there are so many different groups with different incentives that are looking into psychedelics and trying to use them to push forward their narrative.
Right. It's a wild moment in time.
It is.
Yeah, a few days ago, I was watching that clip of Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson discussing the demons.
Yes, I saw that.
Yeah.
I saw that. What was Alex? He was saying that first of all, he said he ate some DMT or something. Can you find that clip? It'd be great to watch that so we could get a refresh. Go to YouTube, type in Alex Jones, Tucker Carlson, DMT. It's a short.
Yeah, it's only 58 seconds.
Yeah, it's like less than a minute.
They're in a car.
There it is. That's it right there. Yeah, give us some volume on that.
I haven't done DMT. That's what everybody says.
Click on it.
I haven't done DMT, but I know a lot of famous people that have and others. And the government since the 70s has been doing intravenous drip with it. It just didn't become popular the last 20 years by eating it. I've talked to well-known people off record who have gone to these big DMT rituals at sacred sites because reportedly those are like gates or places where dimensionally they've been doing sacrifices for thousands of years. So maybe the things hang around there or it's a ley line. They're not sure. But if you go there and take DMT, they're having groups of 20, 30, 40 people who are seeing the same hallucination on it at the same time. They basically say aliens come up the steps of the pyramid or, and everybody's seeing it at the same time. They're having
Maybe it's not a hallucination.
Well, exactly. If this individual was seeing it, it's one thing.
Right.
But then sometimes people in the group even get attacked by these things.
I would be very afraid that those drugs open up a portal for something to enter me.
What? Thoughts on that?
Well, I think that they're partly right. The portal idea anyway. I think that's one of the things that psychedelics and DMT do. They are a portal to previously invisible kinds of information. Yeah. So if you open that portal, there is that information conveyed by the visions, which is angelic or demonic. So if you believe in angels, I always say you believe in demons. So, to the extent that one believes in angels, then I think by necessity you need to believe in demons as well. It's kind of a imagery of good versus evil.
I mean, have you ever heard of anybody getting chased by demons the way he explains it? Where they're coming after them?
I guess I could imagine ayahuasca ceremonies where there's a lot of shamanic communication and information that you would be attacked by demons.
Yeah.
Or it would seem as if you were anyway.
Right. Yeah. So this angels and demons worldview, which is very much I think Tucker Carlson and Alex Jones are like very devout Christians. They talk about it all the time on their programs. So like if they're trying to fit this DMT experience into their worldview, that would make sense. And going back to that John Hopkins study where they're trying to prove some sort of common core to all religions, it's trying to basically paint the fact that like what would the ultimate goal of that be? Would the goal of that be to say that psychedelics created all religions?
Well, that certain aspects of the psychedelic experience, which are defined by this rating scale called the Mystical Experience Questionnaire. Irregardless of your denomination, if your score on the mystical experience scale was number one, high enough, and number two, cut across all of the categories. That there was a common mystical experience that all those volunteers had, Jewish, Muslim, or Christian, which would then lead to one being able to propose a universal religion.
Oh, God.
And that universal, like if it's all the same across all of the religions, there must be some universal religion that can be extracted. But the problem with a universal religion is, whose universal religion?
Right.
And what if you don't agree with it?
Right.
Yeah, then you become a heretic.
Yeah, and how do you push people into a universal religion when people are already in their own unique religions that give them value to their life already? Like, how do you do that?
Well, I don't think you can.
Right. And one of the even scarier ideas is that if you give the church access to psychedelic drugs or give them the license to bring psychedelic drugs into their spiritual practice, now you're making these people who are already subscribed to this idea that there's this deacon that has direct communication with God who is giving these people the answers to their life problems. Now you're putting these already vulnerable people on psychedelics. I can see where that can lead to problems.
Well, I think, you're pointing to the issue of how do you propagate a universal religion? Yeah, which I think, I think the cult of personality would start playing a very big role with the enhanced transference that occurs on psychedelics.
Because people, when they're on I think you've said this before, people on psychedelics are way more, not just vulnerable, but they're way more agreeable.
More suggestible.
Suggestible, that's what it was, yes, right.
And with repeated exposure to the same suggestion over and over on psychedelics. Yeah. I think it would get kind of fanatic in a way. It could.
Yeah. Yeah, because even people who are huge psychedelic proponents who think that psychedelics are the panacea for everything in culture and society, I mean, even they kind of get pretty fanatical to some extent, where psychedelics become their god,
or they become God somehow, or they're God's messenger. I was talking
the
earlier,
Messiah complex.
Yeah. There's a lot of messianism in the idea of a universal religion. Like, who would be the spokesman, for example? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you would have a religious figure. You did the experiment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what happened to you?
Yeah, so I did it, and it was my first time doing DMT.
First time, really?
Yeah, it was my first time.
Yeah.
So I kind of I did it. I did the 4 or 5 hits of the pen, and then I was kind of on the couch and I kind of closed my eyes for a little bit. That was the most intense part of it. Mm-hmm. After the super intense part of it was over, I was like, okay, I think I'm back in my body. Now I can go check out this laser. I really wanted to.
Still very stoned though, right?
Yes, still very stoned. Not anywhere near the peak of the experience though.
Well, you can't move on the peak. You're a completely different place.
Yes, exactly.
That's the weird thing about it. It feels like a completely different place. It couldn't be any more similar to this.
It was crazy. I was explaining, it felt like it literally, I've talked about this ad nauseum, but it was the way I am such a lightweight when it comes to drugs. I was terrified, even when it comes to smoking pot. I can easily go over the edge. So I was super terrified that this was going to be that times a million. I don't know anything about this stuff. What do I know? But it was nothing like that. It was just my soul being ejected out of the top of my head and leaving behind every attachment I have to my mortal being, my wife, my kids, this podcast, everything I've ever known, just being completely detached, and just my soul being shuttled through light arteries. And then, I opened my eyes and depth was crazier. My depth perception was on steroids, and I could see pockets of space floating around. Anyways, after that ended, I was I want to check out this laser. So he had it shined on the wall. I walked over to it and I stared at it for a little bit. And like I said, I could see these little speckles of light and gears. Once I focused on these little specks of light, I could see gears connected and rotating together back behind the wall. So like it was like a rip in the wall. The light was creating a tear in the wall, and I could see this pocket of space back there where these gears were moving around.
Yeah, and what were those gears doing?
Just spinning. Just spinning. As far as I can remember, they were just spinning, and they were all connected. And I never saw any sort of text or code or anything.
Spinning, like the gears were big, small?
Very tiny.
Very tiny.
Very tiny gears, millions of them. And they were all connected.
Yeah, the first time I smoked a drug, 5-methoxy-DMT, I found myself surrounded by dwarves, like Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, and there were just countless, just circling a big chamber that I was at the bottom of.
Wow.
Like a catwalk.
Like a silo?
Yeah, like a silo.
Like, oh, wow.
And an extensive catwalk, and the catwalk was completely filled with dwarves.
That sounds amazing.
It was kind of scary because I wasn't expecting it at all, and they didn't have the best motivation. Somehow they seemed a little. They seemed kind of sinister.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it was an interesting experience. I was a lot younger, and I was wrestling at the time with the notion of good and evil. And with the dwarves, you usually think of dwarves as fun, but these had a malevolent feeling about them. So
did they communicate?
Only by their expression. They'd look at me through the corner of their eyes.
Oh God,
yeah.
That was a little sinister.
It was pretty sinister, yeah. And so I came out of it and said, to my sitter, what should I choose? Should I choose good or should I choose evil? And she said, "There's no difference," or something which.
Oh wow, there's no difference.
Helped calm me down.
Wow. Yeah, the 5-methoxy-DMT seems terrifying. Is it nothing like NN, or is it similar just on steroids?
It's the white light. You're completely like in most cases. Mine was atypical. Usually, you have no visions on 5-methoxy. A more typical experience is it's just the white light. Things is just white out. Yeah, and it's ecstatic, and you're out of body. No time, no space.
Is that the only time you had visions on the 5-methoxy?
It was the first time I had.
You ever did it?
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
wow.
Well, I've only done DMT. Like I've only had one big DMT experience, which is a very strange thing. You would expect that I would have had thousands, but. I know mostly about DMT through my volunteers. I mean, that's the truth.
You've only done it how many times?
Just one time, actually.
What?
One big time, yeah.
For real? Mm-hmm. And that was the time you just explained?
That was the time, in the mid-1980s. Yeah, it convinced me to study DMT. And
why haven't you done it since?
Haven't really felt the urge to or the need to. It was so intense. I mean, who needs to? I mean, you do take a risk entering into such an intense experience. And I thought I had really done well with the first one, and I would just leave it at that. It's kind of like, I guess, going, attaining the mountaintop the first time. So there didn't seem to be any need to repeat that.
Interesting. I would have imagined you would have done it thousands of times.
Yeah. No.
Because that was the basis of your latest book, right? The latest book that you published was the first time that you talked about all your personal experiences with psychedelics.
Right. My Altered States.
My Altered States,
yeah,
right.
That came out in December.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, I can't imagine that somebody like you would have only done it one time.
Just once, 1986 or so. Yeah, I was at the point of ending my melatonin research, and I didn't know what to do. I was speaking at a conference and was speaking about DMT and the pineal gland. And that's when Terrence came up and said, "Would you like to smoke some DMT?" Yeah, so I said, sure. And
how do you say no to that?
Yeah, went to a room, had some good friends around.
What was the background with your melatonin research?
Well, I was looking for an endogenous compound for spiritual experience. I kind of came up with this fascination in college, that believing that there was a part of the brain or a substance the brain made that created spiritual experience, that spiritual experiences which were like the psychedelic drug one, and spiritual experiences like those brought about by meditation. I thought there was some common biological factor that was activated in both those states.
Mm-hmm.
So the pineal gland was the first place I looked.
Mm-hmm.
I was at Stanford at the time. Jim Fadiman was there as well. Jim gave me the idea to look into the pineal. And I found out about melatonin, which nobody knew much about the human physiology back then in the early 1980s. So there was some evidence that it was psychedelic, that made dreams more intense. All by itself might be psychedelic. So we studied melatonin. I was wondering if the pineal gland was that substance.
Oh, interesting.
Responsible for psychedelic experiences.
Oh, wow.
It's spiritual ones which had psychedelic properties.
Yeah, I learned recently that melatonin is created through this thing called melanopsin, which is a chemical, or not a chemical, but it's a hormone that is created through your eyes. So like when you wake up early and you watch the sunrise, your eyes produce this chemical called melanopsin, or a hormone called melanopsin, which is converted to melatonin, which regulates your circadian rhythm. And I guess the melatonin kicks in really heavy 12 hours after that first light enters your eyes or your retina.
Well, my understanding is that tryptophan is the precursor for melatonin, that it begins with dietary tryptophan.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
dietary tryptophan.
Mm-hmm, and that gets modified to melatonin, ultimately. Melanopsin, gosh, I think that's a protein or an enzyme.
Can you find that, Steve? Find out the connection between melanopsin and melatonin, because I might be getting that wrong, but I could have sworn that was the way Alexis explained it to us. Nope, I don't know what that is.
It's your T-shirt website.
Yeah. Well, there is a connection. I'm just wondering what that connection was. Just search that, see what happens.
This might be a good pee break time.
Yeah, sure. One of the most interesting things to me is this, how people recall this telepathic experiences on DMT. And not only that, there's telepathic experiences like within near-death experiences. There's I don't know if you've ever heard stories of people who like been in a car accident together, explaining they're in this, having this near-death dream, hallucinate, whatever you want to call it, with the other person that they were in that accident with. And in some cases, that person being carried off if they died, them being put back into their body. And then you have like Dennis, when he talks about what they, him and Terrence and La Chorrera, I think Dennis ate mushrooms, like so many mushrooms that he was in this other universe for like 10 days.
Right. And
him and Terrence were communicating telepathically the whole time.
Yeah. Very interesting. Well, shared or telepathic experiences, like I ought to talk more about the book probably. When the opportunity comes up. And this is a good example of the first time I smoked any cannabis product, which is one of the chapters in my book, My Altered States. Yeah, I had a telepathic experience with my roommate.
Oh, wow.
We were sitting on a Persian carpet on the floor, and the floor just gave out from under us. And we floated over town, and we were controlling the movement of the rug as well as comparing what we were seeing down below. Yeah. Oh, look at that. Oh, look. And we were seeing it together, and we were steering it higher and lower.
Wow.
And we both.
Are you sure this weed wasn't laced with anything?
Well, it was hash actually.
Oh, it was hash.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a funny story. Like it's a Friday night in November, and there was a knock on the door, and the senior resident advisor came by, and he said, I hear you haven't gotten stoned yet, which was true. And would you like to smoke some blonde Lebanese hash. So, yeah, he came. He came in, and we smoked, and some friends came in, and the flying carpet experience took place.
Oh wow, that's wild. Yeah, the telepathy thing. How do you explain that?
Well, I think it would be just sort of a step up from shared feelings or shared thoughts. Why not have shared perceptions too? I think if you're close enough, vibrationally, and if DMT, let's say, were involved, which would be mediating the visions, then you might be able to share an experience like that.
Mm. Have you ever heard anybody ever engaging in any kind of trip like how Dennis describes what they did in La Chorrera, where he's basically gone for 10 days, and he explained that like he had to eat the mushrooms that was just like their calories for the day. And he couldn't even like shit on his own.
Mm-hmm.
He literally explained like how he had to take a shit. He had to like ask somebody to take a shit for him. And,
oh, really?
Like, he was just like completely out of his body for 10 days, communicating with Terrence.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know if there's ever been anything like that done before. And I'd be curious, like how many of those experiences where people are sharing an experience like that and communicating telepathically, how many times has that been done or recorded?
Yeah, I've got a colleague at Bastyr University up in Seattle who's interested in actually, doing, brain scans on people in distant rooms, and seeing if they can be telepathic, and if so, would their brain function, their EEG be similar?
Yeah. That would be fascinating.
Yeah, that's a very cool study. I don't know if it's been finished or published or whatnot, but I think that's one of the ways that you could start to study telepathy.
I always wonder if like these experiences that we have are like something that we were more attuned to centuries ago, or even hundreds of thousands of years ago. If we had these abilities to communicate telepathically, or to even be in more of an altered state, or have just more of an experience of reality in real life, similar to how people describe their experiences, like when they go to the Amazon for the first time, how they explain like all these dormant senses just wake up, being in the jungle, being disconnected from technology, and all these things,
Yeah, and that's one of the ways in which they become more telepathic.
Right.
Yeah.
I wonder if like this telepathic, if just ancient humans our bodies were more technologically advanced, and we had ways to communicate without verbal, right? And just because we had our antennas were more in tune to something else.
Yeah.
That now our antennas are kind of just, they've gone dormant because of the evolution of technology and phones and the internet and all these things.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Julian Jaynes and the bicameral mind?
I've heard of it.
Yeah.
I've heard of the bicameral mind.
Yeah. So, Jaynes taught that, there was the spoken voice, which occurred all of the time in everyone. And then at some point biologically that just, or at some point there were changes in brain structure and function that made the spoken voice go away. It's interesting within the tradition of Hebrew Bible prophecy. There's an end of prophecy that occurred at a certain point. That would not have taken place as far back as Jaynes is suggesting.
So she's saying the human mind operated in a non-conscious state until about 3,000 years ago, where individuals experienced auditory hallucinations as commands from God, guiding their actions. Whoa.
Yeah, so it places the self on the side of the body. And there was no self. There was no personal self. You were just kind of responding to this thing.
The right hemisphere of the brain interpreted sensory data, judged and decided and formed language, while the left hemisphere acted on these commands without being aware of the decision-making process.
No free will.
Wow.
Or was it was experienced anyway as no free will. And then the authority became introjected, for some reason, which may have come about because of volcanic activity, earthquakes, those kinds of things, some natural catastrophes.
3,000 years ago.
Yeah, the end of the prophetic stream was about 2,500 years ago or so.
The end of the prophetic stream.
Yeah.
So this is so you wrote the whole book on the Hebrew Bible and prophets. And what the hell is the government doing right now in their research into this stuff that we don't even know about?
Yeah.
Because we didn't know about MK Ultra until the church hearing, the stuff came out in 1975.
The Church Commission, yeah.
So and that stuff was buried, with Charles Manson and all that. No one knew about any of that till way later. I wonder, what could they be doing now that we won't find out until 15, 20 years from now?
Yeah.
If we even ever find out, right?
Well, as you mentioned, the budget that the government has got for research grants is immeasurable.
$27 million to the University of North Carolina to study how to take the trip out of psychedelics to heal soldiers from PTSD and combat fatigue.
Non-psychedelic psychedelics. Yeah. They are supposed to stimulate neuroplasticity and neurogenesis without the trip. Yeah, there's one which is a compound similar to ibogaine called TBG or tabernatholog, and I think that's being studied in humans now. Yeah, finally, it's one of these non-psychedelic psychedelics.
Do you think that you can get it's a super placebo?
It could be, and it might be as effective as for example, Prozac.
But do you think you can still get the effect that you get from psychedelics because I feel like the trip is like the major component of it that gives you that effect.
Right.
Well, I feel like you can't have the psychedelic without the trip.
Well, I know, and that's still a point of raging controversy, actually, even within the academic community. Is the subjective experience necessary? My feeling is that the non-psychedelic ones will be like super Prozacs and very helpful in most people who don't want to have a trip. And the drugs that continue causing trips will be used for the more difficult cases. So you have a higher chance of responding, but also a higher chance of adverse effects. And that's the reason, that you'd only use it in cases that don't respond to non-psychoactive ones.
Have you ever heard of any sort of use of psychedelics on the battlefield and not being used sort of post-combat PTSD, as far as enhancing people with visual acuity, edge detection, and more accuracy and stuff like this?
Yeah, I've read accounts. Yeah, but I don't know if they're really based on objective data. But it maybe those are the kind of studies that are occurring behind the scenes.
Travis sent me an article about this guy named Dana Beal.
Yeah, I know Dana. Very nice.
Oh,
guy.
really?
Yeah, quite a character.
And I think in this article, it's explained how he was trying to take Iboga from Africa and fly it to Ukraine to use with soldiers fighting in the Ukrainian-Russian war,
right? To
give to these these Ukrainian soldiers, but they weren't just they were using it as a way to get people back out there, right? If they're experiencing combat fatigue or PTSD, they can get them on this Iboga or ibogaine and then turn and burn, get them right back out into the battlefield.
Yeah.
Or even enhance their combat skills.
Yeah, I think smaller doses would be like a microdose.
Like a microdose. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Right.
And it could, theoretically enhance, fighting ability. At the same time, though, it might also affect, somebody's, desire to fight.
Oh, is this from the article?
Yeah.
Cannabis activist and advocate for ibogaine traveled to Ukraine to promote the use of ibogaine for treating war veterans. Right. This is all about the PTSD. You can turn soldiers. Oh, he believes, Beale believes that you can use ibogaine to turn soldiers into super soldiers, and has been actively campaigning for its use in Ukraine despite facing legal challenges in the United States. And then he was arrested. Yeah, he's been in and out of jail.
Currently on bail.
So if I was the military industrial complex, I would be trying to figure out I would be throwing the most money on how to weaponize psychedelics. Yeah. And they've been doing it. I mean, we know they did it all throughout the Cold War because they used Manson, right, to basically stain the psychedelic movement, right? They tried to.
Yeah. Did you see the movie Jacob's Ladder?
No.
It's about BZ, which was used on soldiers in Vietnam.
BZ?
BZ something. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. Look at Jacob's Ladder.
See if you can find that, Steve. Jacob's Ladder.
Yeah. Tim Roth, I think.
Tim.
Yeah, there's BZ.
Tim Robbins.
Tim Robbins, yeah.
It's a great movie.
You've seen this, Steve?
Oh yeah, it's a classic, man.
3. I'm not even going to try to say that.
Yeah,
quinceanediol benzylate, a glyphosate anticholinergic cholinergic that causes powerful hallucinations and altered behavior, portrayed as chemical warfare agent that leads soldiers to experience nightmarish visions and lose control of their actions. This was like a nonfiction?
No, it's
this was okay.
Yeah, live action, I guess. Well, yeah, so I think, giving soldiers, psychedelics is fraught. I mean, what's the guarantee?
Yeah. What's the guarantee they're not just going to all like drop their weapons and give each other hugs?
Right. Right.
But what so with microdoses, you don't experience a psychedelic effect. But I've never really microdosed. I've done it a couple times, but from what I hear from people who microdose all the time is that it's a stimulant, right? Yeah,
which is why I think a microdose of ibogaine might make soldiers more alert and able to endure more discomfort.
It would be far better than using methamphetamines, which the Russian soldiers are taking. Yeah. They're taking Captagon.
Captagon, a very interesting compound. Yeah.
Which is basically just it's not a methamphetamine, but it's a strong amphetamine, I think.
Yeah, it's a stimulant, that's for sure.
Yeah. Super stimulant.
Yeah, well, wasn't that like really an important source of income, for one of the countries there? Captagon exports.
I think it was coming from Syria, right?
Oh, okay, right.
And Syria and Russia were close allies, so I think they're somehow exporting that, or Russia was buying the Captagon from Syria. Isn't that what Norman Ohler was explaining to us?
Oh, well, this reminds me of, I've been wanting to mention that the book by Philip K. Dick, the Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, the 3 Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch. It's a book by Philip K. Dick. Mm-hmm. Yeah, are you familiar with that?
I'm familiar with P.K. Dick, but I'm not familiar with that book.
Yeah, it's a competition.
What's the name of it again? Sorry.
The 3 Stigmata, of Palmer Eldritch. It's a novel that describes, like a war for dominion of the psychedelic market on planet Earth between a Terran psychedelic and one from an interstellar location. Yeah, so the one that's made on Earth puts people into the world of Perky Pat, who is in a dollhouse, and you interact with the figures in the dollhouse, and a lot of people spend time in that space, with the compound that's made on Earth. And, the one that comes in from interstellar space is totally weird. You take it once, and you never come down.
Oh, wow.
You come down, but that's just part of the trip. Yeah, it just goes on and on. It's really just this nightmarish, limbo state. So Captagon, methamphetamine, there's all this, competition for what's what's going to be, the drug that everyone is taking along the lines of, Brave New World even.
Right.
Yeah, and Soma.
The amphetamines, I mean, basically the Nazis proved that the amphetamines didn't work, right? Because they wanted to do this blitz. They thought that they could put their soldiers on, which they did. They put them all on these like super strong Pervitin methamphetamine pills.
Pervitin, yeah.
And then they were awake for 20 days straight, and then they were just burned out at the end of it.
Well, they're just burned out. Yeah, it might help for a short period of time.
Yeah.
One of the towns in New Mexico I worked in has a big oil and gas industry, and I worked at one of the clinics in that town. Yeah, and I saw a number of the workers, and when they started work, they were given a lunchbox, with an apple and a sandwich and methamphetamine.
What?
In order to help them get through 18-hour shifts, like on a regular basis.
When was this?
This was, 2004, 2006.
Wow. Is that legal?
I don't think so. No.
It's bizarre how many people take amphetamines around. Like how many people are prescribed amphetamines for just things that it seems like could be fixed with other like more healthy alternatives, right? Because like so many writers, so many researchers, and so many, like, especially kids in college are just like, they've been on, I know people like friends who have been prescribed these amphetamines since they were, in their early teens in school. And they're like, now they're in their late 20s, early 30s. Some of them got pregnant, like, oh my God, I have to stop taking this Adderall now. I've been taking it since I was fucking 12.
Yeah.
And they have this just insane withdrawal because they've been taking it they've been prescribed it since the beginning of their lives.
Yeah. Well, in some of the clinical situations I've worked, I would prescribe Adderall. Yeah. And it would be helpful when it was helpful. This was in the early 2000s, though. I think people are more liberal with diagnosing people with ADHD. But if you have bad ADHD, stimulants can be like a miracle cure almost.
Really?
Yeah.
Is it the idea of it that it basically just like stimulates dopamine release?
Mm-hmm. It stimulates the release of dopamine. I think it also directly stimulates dopamine receptors.
Yeah, because I think I have some level of ADD or ADHD, but like whenever I take Adderall, and I've taken it in the past, I hate the way I feel. And I hate the way I feel, especially the next day.
The next day, yeah. One of my friends once gave me I think 5 milligram dose of Adderall, and I went home and I wrote after I took it, and just like 20 pages. It really was effortless.
Really?
Yeah, but the following day I read what I wrote. And
good?
It just was terrible. Yeah.
Wasn't Stephen King doing just heaps of cocaine when he was writing Cujo and some of his other books? I think he writes. There's stories about how Stephen King was just drinking tons of alcohol and doing tons of coke when he was writing some of his novels.
His stories are pretty dark.
Yeah.
Yeah. My stepkids used to buy Stephen King novels for Christmas for me. Oh, read this, Rick. It'll cheer you up. Yeah. So
and PK Dick too. What was he? Wasn't he taking stimulants when he was writing?
Yeah, stimulants, methamphetamine. Oh, no,
he was taking meth.
No, he wasn't taking meth. I think it was amphetamine primarily.
Just amphetamine.
Yeah. Poor guy. God, he really burned bright while he burned.
Yeah, that's interesting. Some of the most prolific writers were just on heaps of drugs. And one of the other things that was interesting when we were learning about this stuff from Norman Ohler the other day. He's a guy who wrote the history of drugs in the Third Reich. This company called Merck.
Merck, yeah.
The pharmaceutical company that was alive and well in Nazi Germany. They were developing, I guess cocaine was like developed in the 80s. And they had a cocaine, or Merck had developed a cocaine that didn't have any sort of negative withdrawal effects to it. Mm-hmm. And there was actually an article I read, which was fascinating, about one of the guys from the Rolling Stones was talking about how they would just have heaps of cocaine behind the speakers and the amplifiers on stage, and they would be able to do it all day. They had to do shows, do cocaine, and they would never have any withdrawal symptoms.
Yeah.
Because it was Merck cocaine. They were doing the actual pharmaceutical grade Merck.
Yeah. Well, you can still, find pharmaceutical, cocaine out there. It is still used in medicine.
Right, like for brain surgeries and things like this, I think.
I think, mostly
Eye surgery,
for
maybe?
things that have to do with the eye. Yeah.
Oh, really?
It makes the cornea numb.
Huh.
So it is still in use. It's Schedule II, actually. It's not even Schedule I.
So like for cataract surgeries and things like this?
Yeah, I think that's what they put into my eyes. I had cataract surgery a few years back. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Particularly for ear, nose, and throat procedures. Because it numbs it. And it comes in dark colored glass bottles.
Yeah. Wasn't Merck making MDMA too? Weren't they the ones who? I think they were. I think they were the first, to synthesize.
When
MDMA.
was MDMA first synthesized?
1914, I think.
1914.
Yeah. It, and it really wasn't, explored very far for application in, clinical medicine. Yeah, it wasn't until like MDMA psychotherapy became a thing, back in the 80s.
Yeah, MDMA is another one that I've never tried, but I've heard lots of great stories.
Yeah.
And David made a bunch of MDMA.
Yeah. I think that MDMA that Dave Nichols made for MAPS is still being used. I mean, it was a huge amount.
Yeah, he said he made a ton of it.
Yeah.
And so how did you guys first meet, and when he developed all the DMT for you?
Yeah. So David Nichols made our DMT. I met him at the Esalen Institute for a conference that was organized in '85, I think. Rick Doblin organized it, and it was a collection of people interested in doing psychedelic drug studies. Dave was there. That's where I met him. I met. Shulgin, I met Stan Groff, John Lilly. Yeah, so it was it was a place to convene. Yeah. The history of MAPS is very interesting.
Yeah.
Rick's history. I've known Rick since 85, 84. Yeah.
Oh wow. The interesting thing about that article that Travis did, which was that trial that never got the published thing, the one that never got released, the findings, the religious one with the psilocybin.
Yeah.
Was I guess a lot of the big pushback to that stuff was a lot of the people that were doing these experiments were also engaging in using the drugs themselves.
Right.
And that's frowned upon.
Well, especially for any kind of substance, any kind of drug with a lot of mind-altering characteristics. Yeah, if the research team has been indoctrinated, let's say, in a particular model and to the influence of psychedelics, that's going to affect their treatment of a person in a psychedelic state.
So would the ideal situation to be have somebody conducting the study who had never done psychedelics? Is that the argument?
Well, I think it would be interesting to compare, and that comparison has never been done. Which is it wouldn't be that hard a study to do.
Well, my thing is how do you even have somebody interested in doing that study in the first place if they haven't experienced psychedelics? Right? I can't conceive how somebody would dedicate so much of their life to studying these things unless they had experienced them themselves. It's like with any discipline, I would think.
Yeah, but I think as a result of your experiences, you would be coming in with a mindset based on your own experiences. And if you hadn't experienced it, then you would just be coming in clinically, let's say.
Right.
Yeah, it would be more of a blank slate. You wouldn't have as many preconceptions. About what was going to happen to the person and how to interpret it.
Right. And you knew John Lilly?
I met John Lilly.
Really?
Yeah.
He was doing, I had a guy in here, Richard O'Barry, who was a dolphin trainer for Flipper.
Oh, really?
And he made that documentary, The Cove, which won one of the top awards for documentaries. I forget what the awards are called, but they documented the slaughter of all the dolphins in Japan. And he said that he befriended John Lilly in Florida. And John Lilly, and this was in, what year would that have been? That would have been what, in the 60s?
The 60s.
That would have been in the 60s,
Yeah.
in Miami, when Rick O'Barry was working for the Seaquarium there. John Lilly had some crazy funding from NASA to do studies on dolphins with psychedelics, and he was like doing shit to their brains and putting them on LSD and things like this.
Well, I think he was very interested in human-animal communication. And,
Oh yeah, that's what.
yeah, and he thought LSD might enhance that. Yeah, between humans and dolphins, both on acid, they would be telepathic, like we were talking about earlier.
Right. And I don't think he ever came up with anything. But the fact that NASA, why the hell was NASA funding that?
Yeah. Well, I suppose if your astronauts are in suspended animation, you can keep them on DMT for 3 years, and they'd still be able to communicate with each other.
Really?
When I was doing my DMT studies, I wrote to NASA, and I said, if you want to go to Mars, this can be a long time. What are people going to do? And I thought, well, if they were just given DMT for 3 years, or like for extensive periods of time, that would make the time go by pretty fast.
While they're in space.
Yeah. I never heard back, I think.
Oh God. Yeah, because I don't know how long it would take to get to Mars.
About 3 years.
3 years.
Yeah.
So is the idea that when we do Mars time travel, that the astronauts would go to sleep for a large portion of that time?
I think a large portion of that time.
And so if you put the astronauts to sleep, you could give them DMT infusions, and they would somehow be able to telepathically communicate in these
Exactly.
in these states. Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's crazy. We haven't been able to get back to the moon since the moon landing. Even, and Elon wants to take us to Mars.
Yeah, but it'll be the same human problems, don't you think? I mean, greed, hate, delusion. We'll do that on Mars. Yeah.
During the Vietnam War, when that monk lit himself on fire,
Yeah.
the burning monk,
Yeah.
that was, I think, at one point one of the most famous images on planet Earth. It was like the most shared. More people saw that, and that was from what I understand recently. Zoltan was explaining to me that a lot of people think that was like a political thing that he did, but according to him, and according to other Buddhists, is that monks absolutely wanted nothing to do with any sort of political ideas or movements at all. Like they were almost like the idea of their practice was the actual opposite of politics. So what he believes that burning monk was, it was a call, like a recruiting call, because from what I understand is more people got interested in Buddhism and meditation after that.
Yeah.
Than ever in history.
Yeah, well, speaking of the Defense Department and, DARPA, when I was at Stanford, I took a class on Indian Buddhism by a freshly minted PhD from the University of Wisconsin, who told us that these departments around the country were established by the Defense Department to understand Buddhism, because they were thinking, who are these monks that set themselves on fire?
Yeah.
And so they established centers of Buddhist studies at a number of American universities. Yeah, and she was one of the grad students.
Right after this happened?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Great story, huh?
That's bizarre. Oh my God. I don't even know what to think about that.
Yeah, it was a national security kind of issue, which I can understand, but it had
they wanted to understand how you can attain that level of self-control or enlightenment to where you can light yourself on fire and not even blink an eye.
Yeah. I think it was of interest to understand, what is Buddhism? What do they teach? How did they do it?
Oh, God, that's crazy.
Yeah. It's it established a number of centers of Buddhist studies around the country. So there was a positive outcome. Yeah, but the motivation was kind of mixed.
I've heard lots of stories of not that it really relates to Buddhism in particular, but lots of people like high up in the Defense Department and like intelligence agencies, and even people that are involved in like rocket launches, like with NASA and formerly for NASA and now for SpaceX, that are really into this idea of Rosicrucianism.
Oh, really? Yeah, I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, I don't know much about it either. But like the basic idea of it is you can sort of follow these specific protocols to be more tapped into. This is like a kind of a Jungian idea, but like you can tap yourself into this like universal consciousness. Mm-hmm. And sharpen your antenna or increase the signal of your antenna to some other consciousness, and kind of like where you can download information.
Yeah. So how did they do that?
One of these guys who's described in a book by Diana Pasulka, it's called American Cosmic, and he was I think a mission controller for NASA, and he explained it by like he would go outside and get out in the sun first thing in the morning, spend a lot of time out in nature, not drink caffeine, drink lots of water. And somehow like the idea of having lots of water in your system and no like caffeine or stimulants somehow tuned his antenna. Mm-hmm. And this guy claims to be able to download. Now this guy has like patents to all kinds of like,
really?
Like crazy medical breakthrough patents where he's like made a lot of money doing it. And he claims that he gets this information from these downloads that just like come into his mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you wonder where that information comes from.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, is that just, like a latent bit of information or associations that he hadn't made before? Or some kind of download from above. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, do you think I've always wondered whether it's all that important, at least from a psychological point of view, because it's the the message, the information. It's the message, the information that's contained in that state that's more important than what the state actually looks like.
Mm. Yeah, what stood out to me about that is like it seems like the more you get away from technology, if this is true, if you can tap into something by following these protocols, it seems like the general consensus of it is the farther away you get from technology and the diet, the processed foods or energy drinks that we drink all the time, or the fucking what are those things? Those caffeine pouches or nicotine pouches and all of this stuff. And the more you can tap into like this ancient antenna that we have buried in us to get information.
Yeah. Those. I was wondering if those ketone bars contribute.
Yeah, I'm sure they do.
You might get more fine tuned.
Yeah, the ketone stuff's interesting.
Yeah.
There's this crazy story I heard of this guy who was like a whistleblower who was talking about how he worked for some like secret this private aerospace company where they were trying to recruit people for some sort of psychic program where they were trying to basically get psychics into the military and into intelligence to sort of control aircraft or to spy or whatever. And they found that the people with the most psychic abilities were people that were in third world countries that weren't connected to Western civilization at all.
Yeah,
and also young people. So like there was this story that this guy told, and he was a whistleblower, and it was a account of like two people that corroborated it, that they went to Indonesia after there was like an earthquake, and they went there to rescue a bunch of people, and they were trying to find young people who were left-handed and homosexual, and those were the people with those traits that specifically had the highest psychic, or they called it psionic abilities.
Right. Well, the one thing, like I just moved to Albuquerque last year. I was living in a town called Gallup, New Mexico. Mm-hmm. Well, in the county, actually, outside of town. And it was really quiet. Like it just was really quiet. You could hear yourself walk. There'd be a ringing in your ears. Yeah, it was just really quiet in Albuquerque. The main thing that I've had a problem with is the sound. Like, it's really noisy in a city.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and it's more difficult to think. Like, I would just be alone for days and days at my place in Gallup, and that's, and I could be a lot more creative. Or just,
for sure.
Yeah, productive too. Yeah, with fewer distractions.
Yeah,
and the quiet was like, it would produce a spiritual kind of effect at a low level.
Yeah.
Yeah, just being still, because there's nothing to react to.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to that.